It's a great day when you're hanging around. Nothing's ever gonna bring me down. Good times are coming our way. Whenever, wherever, whatever today.
Today is going to be a great day. I am Nikki G, your host. Welcome to the Lone Doctrine, the food for thought exploration station, and your place in making today better than yesterday. Every month we pick a topic, and this month's topic is perspective. Your view, my view, each of our views is different. And it's in that view one can hope it can remain in a place of betterment, of good, a place where we're lifting each other up and not breaking each other down. Life, loss, has a way of changing you. The reason I mention that is because I've lost a light. A bond is still in my life, and I'm right in the middle of grasping onto a new perspective. My grandmother recently passed from cancer, and it's left me feeling as if I'm in a fog. I share this with you not to seek sympathy, but to really express the importance when it comes to seasons, such as the holiday season and the upcoming New Year, in really cherishing and focusing on what's most important: life, love, family, friends, our passions, and our contribution to each and every moment of our lives. Our perspective creates the environment we reside in. So what will you choose? What kind of perspective do you have? It may not always be easy. For instance, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't angry at cancer. Cancer is an awful disease, and watching it slowly take my loved ones is one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. You might be thinking, isn't the holiday season about joy and giving and happiness? This is kind of a downer. Yes, yes, and yes. The point is, life is too short to pitch a tent in Negativeville. When we go through hard times, we have every right to feel. But as my grandma used to say, we must soldier on, and we must always be ready. Ready to greet a new beginning, ready to offer a helping hand, ready to make this one and only life the best life. Even through the darkest moments of our lives, perspective is so important. As you may or may not know, the Lone Doctrine is an exploration station. We explore the world's food for thought so you can ultimately find what works for you in order to make today better than yesterday. In light of our topic of the month and facing one's most difficult situations in life, one being losing a loved one or a friend, I'd like to share with you Dealing with Tragedy and Loss by Steve Pavlina. How does one mentally and emotionally deal with serious tragedies such as the loss of a loved one? What about a global tragedy like natural disasters, genocide, or famine? It is human to feel down and depressed after such events. Or is it possible to remain conscious and positive throughout? Is there a deeper meaning behind these seemingly random and tragic experiences? My views on this subject, Steve's views on this subject, stray quite a bit from the social norm. But as with all of his writing, his intention is to help you think about such things much more consciously, regardless of whether you agree or disagree. So what is tragedy? Our social conditioning teaches us to interpret events like the death of a loved one, a natural disaster, or a permanent disability as tragic. To experience emotional pain when such things occur is considered perfectly normal behavior. There's even a process where expected to follow denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. These stages were defined by Elizabeth Ross in her book On Death and Dying as the 5 stages of dealing with catastrophic loss, later popularized as the 5 stages of grief. You can find many variations on this, but the basic pattern is what we must experience in the pain of loss and then, hopefully, get over it and move on. Of course, many people never complete the getting over it part. For some people, a tragic loss becomes a death sentence. They simply give up on their lives and it's game over. But what defines a tragedy? Nothing but our thinking makes it so. A tragedy is formed out of an attachment to a circumstance. When you become attached to circumstances and then experience an outcome that runs afoul of your expectations, emotional pain is the natural result. And the greater the attachment, the greater the pain. For example, death of a loved one equals tragedy, death of a stranger equals news. Killing of a dog equals cruelty, killing of a pig may equal dinner. Americans killed is terrorism, Americans killing is heroism. Current social conditioning still encourages us to think in terms of our own emotional attachments. Consider the Support Our Troops slogan that you'll often see on a car bumper sticker in the USA. Support our troops, but not theirs. We're supposed to be attached to one set of human beings, but not the other. US versus them, me versus not me. Now remember, this is our exploration. Whether you agree or disagree, I encourage you to think critically, to take everything in, because you never know when there might be one seed of greatness that will make listening to this perspective worth it. So let's keep going. The root of attachment is fear. Without fear, there's no attachment to circumstances, no emotional resistance to outcomes. If you could remain open to everything and attached to nothing, then you would experience no fear. If you would consciously choose to live a fear-based existence, then attachments are fine. But if you wish to rid your life of unnecessary fear, then such socially conditioned attachments must eventually be rejected and replaced by a conscious choice. On average, over 150,000 people die on this planet every single day. That's more than 1 million in a week. Given those figures, why should the deaths of people we know be any more tragic than the deaths of people we don't? If we're going to eventually confront the 5 stages of grief, why not do it up front? Move past denial and over to acceptance right now. Our social conditioning frames our lives within a context whereby certain events are labeled as tragic. But there's nothing inherently tragic about those events. They are what they are. We have plenty of other viable interpretations available. We need not remain loyal to a context that creates unnecessary pain and robs us of joy. The dead do not require that we suffer upon their departure. All the pain we create is our own, by allowing ourselves to adopt a disempowering, fear-based context. Instead of viewing certain events as tragic, why not choose a context in which they become transformational? Change is a natural part of human existence. Perhaps instead of resisting change, we can learn to embrace it in all its various forms. Instead of labeling events as good or bad, we can withhold judgment and simply accept them for what they are, their ever-unfolding dance of consciousness. Free will gives us the opportunity to choose our own thoughts, and that includes our context. To label events as tragic and defeating is a choice, one that fully conscious people would be unlikely to make. You are not a victim of the circumstance of your life. Sometimes you may find yourself unconsciously overwhelmed by circumstances, but when you regain your consciousness once again, you always have the option of choosing your mental response to events. And your mental response will dictate your emotional response. The more you resist circumstances, the more pain you experience. The more you accept them, the more joy you can experience. We're taught that a painful, fear-based response is appropriate in certain circumstances, but that is an arbitrary choice, and a highly disempowering one at that. Even a seemingly tragic loss as perceived from a social context can be viewed as a joyful transformation from a different context. Steve, for one, prefers to adopt a context which leads to joy and empowerment, regardless of the circumstances. He sees no reason to buy into a context that disempowers him. Some would say that he's living in denial, and from a certain perspective that would be accurate. He will gladly deny himself unnecessary suffering so he can avoid the greater tragedy of living in denial of joy. He accepts events as they occur, but he chooses his own interpretation of them, the most empowering interpretation he can, one that puts him in a state of joy and peace rather than suffering and depression. From a state of joy, he is free to act without fear. From a state of fear, he feels trapped and usually does nothing. So what is this idea that he's talking about, joyful transformation? Suppose you experience an event which would be viewed by most people as a tragic loss, such as the sudden death of your spouse. Initially, you'd experience an unconscious reaction. Most likely, you can't accurately predict what exactly that reaction would be. It would probably be a big shock. But eventually, you'd regain consciousness and have the opportunity to consider what the event means to you. That's where you have a choice. You can opt in to the prevailing social context and endure a long-term pattern of grief and pain. You could blame others or yourself for your partner's death. You could be angry that he or she left you behind. You could dwell on the challenges of raising your children alone. You could suffer for years if you choose to. You could even choose to check out of the game of life. But to interpret that event as a tragic blow isn't the only option you have available. You do not have to interpret such events from a position of fear and loss. You can choose to view them from a context that leaves you empowered, one that makes you experience an even deeper peace, a deeper joy, and a deeper love. We will not improve the circumstances of this physical world by labeling them as tragic. That robs us of all our power to think and to act consciously. Such attachment defines us as victims instead of the creators we truly are. Victims cannot save our environment. Victims cannot end wars. Victims cannot transform our corporations. Only creators have the power to make these changes. But even while we regard ourselves as victims, we are still powerful creators. We're so powerful, in fact, that we can even choose to create ourselves as victims. So what is your choice? Do you choose to be the conscious creator of your life or the unconscious victim of it? There is no right or wrong answer. You have the free will to do whatever you wish. But even if you choose to deny yourself the full exercise of your true power, you can never deny yourself the existence of it. It is always there, locked away in a safe place, and the state of joy is the key that opens the door. Myself, having experienced loss lately, makes the holiday season even harder. But it also has empowered me and has given me clarity and has changed who I am. I've never been a fan of putting weight and stress on the menial, and that is reiterated even more in my life. Even though sometimes all the holiday requirements require a lot of work, my perspective has changed. What I wouldn't give to have my grandma by my side. So whether you've experienced loss or not, once you have, or if you put yourself in someone else's shoes, you'll gain a whole new perspective on life. You'll gain a whole new perspective on what you view as stress and heartache and pain and depression and sadness. One, I hope changing your perspective will bring you more joy and more happiness and more clarity in protecting your peace and cherishing what's most important. Thank you so much for listening, for tuning in and exploring with us. We have more episodes coming your way every single week. So if you haven't subscribed to us on iTunes or wherever you've been listening to us, subscribe today, and thank you to our current subscribers for your reviews. Your reviews help in making it easier to find the podcast in the search engines for those in need. And an extra thank you to our Patreons. The Lone Doctrine is a listener-supported podcast, and if you're interested in supporting us and keeping us on air, head over to patreon.com/Lone Doctrine, patreon.com/Lone Doctrine. Together, we make a difference. And until next time, keep fighting the good fight.